Good evening. Good evening, everyone. It's great to see all of you. It is wonderful to be in the month of June already. And there's a lot going on in the bee world. There's so much happening, and I'm excited to share it with you guys and talk about what we need to be doing in our bees right now in the heat of the honey flow or the start of the honey flow, depending on where in the country you are. If we haven't met yet, my name is Blake Shook. I'm one of the owners of the Bee Supply and started out with 2 beehives in my backyard about 20 years ago, and I have over about 30,000 beehives now. And one of my favorite things to do is spend the evening with all of you talking about bees. So I'm always thankful for all of you tuning in live or watching this recording later on YouTube, and giving me the chance to chat about bees. It's wonderful. So appreciate all of you, and always enjoy our times together. Quick little introductory side note for those of you that watch this live, or are wondering next month why the recording is a week late. We do this live the first Thursday night of each month. Next month, that's the 4th of July. I don't know about you guys. I made the assumption that you don't want to spend your evening on the 4th of July with me talking bees instead of out watching fireworks. Maybe that's an incorrect assumption. Maybe you would like to do that. But as much as I love all of you guys, I kind of want to be out watching fireworks with the kids on the 4th of July. So this is actually the first time in almost 5 years that this night has actually fallen on a holiday. So we're going to move it back 1 week. So next month only, it'll be on July 11th instead of July 4th. And I hope you all have a wonderful 4th of July. If you need bees this summer, hey, we've got them. We are selling bees June through August. So if you need summer bees, let us know. We would love to supply you with a hive this time of year. Because it's so hot outside, nooks don't over summer very well. They get too hot in those nook boxes. So we only sell single story hives. So this is a single story hive and brand new equipment that you can get from us up through the month of August. So check out our website. These are available at all of our store locations through the summer. Now that the honey harvest is upon us, don't forget we have a really cool fume board that we invented, and it's the best fume board on the market. It works incredibly fast. You can go to our YouTube channel and watch a video on how it works, or you can scan that QR code and check out how this fume board works. It's super cool, crazy fast and effective. Great way to remove your bees if you're trying to harvest your honey. Chari, tell us about our 48th magazine.
I'm speechless. No, you know me better than that. I'm never speechless. So I'm not speechless, but yes, 4 years, y'all. Can you believe somebody said something about I ought to be writing a book? I'm like, I think we have, right? Blake and I and all of our guests, we've been writing a book, and I think my brain is empty nearly, but we're going to keep going. We're going to keep going. And this is a beautiful photo, and I say that every month, but I want y'all to check that out. Charlie Bee Company, our good friend Charlie Agar. If you don't know Charlie, you need to go to Charlie Bee Company website. It's charliebee.com, I believe. Yep, charliebee.com. He's a super good guy, and he's got a lot going on at his place. And I loved that photo and said, I got to use it. So this month in issue 48, it's a lot about honey, y'all. It's a lot about honey. I wrote an article about the impact of weather, and that was probably a selfish article because we've been going through some weather around here. But read that if y'all had any weather extremes, and I even threw in something about drier climates, and that was a request by one of our listeners last month. I put you some stuff. Put you some stuff in there about drier climates. So that's a big deal too for bees. Is my honey ready to harvest? Now, I know Blake's going to hit a lot of this tonight. Why aren't my supers filling? Harvesting your honey supers. As a matter of fact, that super crazy fast fume board is going to be in there with a video of how to use that thing. It is super fast. Extracting your honey crop. My honey's runny. Okay. I just had fun with that one. That means high moisture, right? How to use a refractometer because my honey's running, right? I'm ready for the next slide, Blake. I want to go ahead and jump into my featured article. This, I tagged in and kind of helped out my friend Dodie Stillman that I know is on this call tonight, helping us with some Q&A and some chats. She wrote this, I guess a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, and it's so good. It's such a good article. I went in and I punched some places and it's good. Wonky comb, what it is and what to do about it. I'm sure none of y'all had this problem. We've had this problem. It can be caused from a lot of different things, but I want to kind of go over a little bit of it. No matter what you call it, it's comb that doesn't follow the correct path, and it can be a real pain. So bees will create a sheet of wax. You see that picture right there? Sheet of wax between the foundation and see, they're supposed to be connected, right? Well, bees will get up there and they'll start hovering above that and not be connected to it. And then all of a sudden you open a hive and you pull a frame and there it is, not even touching. It's a problem. They need to start it over, right? Here's some causes and some solutions. Uneven or leaning hive. If you're off level, that could do it. Hive is weak or hungry. You know, that has showed itself a couple of times over the years that on hives that just aren't thriving, they just can't seem to get this part of their duties right. They cannot make it right. So too much space left between the frames. I think that's probably the number one cause. We don't push our frames all the way together and it kind of makes them start building out further. It's like, I've got space, so I can build my own comb. I don't need your foundation. Dirty or unwaxed foundation. And that's probably, that may be, James is nodding his head. That might be number one, huh? Could be number one. When we get our foundation, even when it's new, it feels like it's got a good coat of wax on it. And for the most part, it does. But I will tell you, a lot of us, we like to wax our frames. So we go in just prior to installing them on the honey supers and we'll wax those right before going in. But I want you to go into this article, see the section about safety tips and melting wax. That's kind of a big deal. I also have helpful tips, the supplies you need, or maybe Dodie wrote that part. A warning, don't buy the wax on the internet, find a beekeeper. If you're not the one that has the wax, then find one to get it from. And then steps to go through to how to wax your frames. And then right beside that, so this is all on page 38, I think. Right beside that, at the end of the article on the 4th page, go in and look at thinking outside of the hive box. One of our viewers from, I think, Brazoria County, if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, Peg Turrentine, she showed me how to dip wax into we'll call it a secondhand turkey roaster. Super cool idea. Go in and read that. That's all I got, Blake. Back to you.
That was great. Thank you. And thank you for 48 amazing issues. So that's quite a feat. So appreciate it. Okay, a couple quick things before we jump out to the bee yard. If you are confused about how to handle varroa mites, if you want to learn how to make summer splits, check out some of our virtual classes. It's a great time of year to start learning about how to treat for varroa mites and how to do summer splits, because that's right around the corner for all of us. So check those out. And with that, let's jump out into the bee.
A new product, relatively new product that's back on the market that I've had a lot of questions about and I'm pretty excited about using. It's called Certan, and I always get, it's Certan, and I'm always getting confused with like, are you certain? It's Certan, not Certain. But it's an all-natural option for keeping wax moths out of your stored honeycombs after you harvest honey. And this is pretty cool because usually we have to use wax moth crystals, which are paradichlorobenzene. They've got a pretty strong smell. They can drive bees out of a box if you don't fully air it out. It doesn't hurt the comb, but it is very much a chemical. And this is an all-natural control that doesn't leave any residues and isn't harmful in any way to honeybees. So it's pretty cool, it's pretty awesome. This is a 5-ounce bottle. You're going to mix it 1 part to 19 parts water. So you just mix this bottle with water, 1 part Certan, 19 parts water, and that will do about 10 to 15 honey supers worth of comb. So it does quite a bit. You just want to mix up however much you're going to use that day. So you don't want to mix up a whole bunch, and it doesn't store very well. It doesn't stay active for long once it's mixed with water. So just mix up however much you're going to use after you harvest honey. I've got this super here that's had the honey harvested out of it. Applying it is really, really easy. Again, 1 part Certan to 19 parts water. You just put it in a little pump up sprayer, and your goal is to coat each side of your comb. You don't want to soak it, but you're gonna lightly wet it, just enough so that it completely soaks the comb. You don't want to fill up that comb with water, but you are going to soak it just enough that it gets a good even coating on every single frame. About 1 ounce per frame is what you're going for. I don't have a great way to measure an ounce, and so I'm really just soaking each frame with a light mist until I can tell that comb is pretty well soaked with this solution. And then that's going to keep the wax moths completely, it's got pretty much 100% efficacy rate for keeping wax moths out of your honeycomb. So you're not drenching it, you're not filling each cell with water, but you are pretty thoroughly soaking each frame so that it's fully and completely coated. And then the key step that a lot of people forget is once you've got them all completely coated, you've got to let these frames dry before they go into storage. You really want that natural residue left over, not the moisture. If you just put this in storage wet, then it's going to mold. So you're just going to do all these frames, and then what I do is I just set the box up on end like this, somewhere where a breeze can blow through it, not in sunlight, but maybe under the eave of your house or on your back porch, somewhere where it gets some airflow. Really for about a day is all it takes, and it completely dries, and then you're ready to put it, store it in a trash bag or in your garage or your shed, wherever you store your honeycomb, and you won't have a problem with wax moths, which is really easy, super cool, really easy to use. So hopefully that's helpful, and it's a great all-natural alternative to using wax moth crystals. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about comb honey. Now, there's all different ways to make comb honey. You can do Ross round honey supers, you can do supers of cut comb honey, and in my opinion, they're all super annoying. It is tough to make comb honey because you're getting bees to draw out a ton of comb every year. Not only that, they're having to draw out this really flimsy pure beeswax foundation, and that's a lot tougher to handle than plastic foundation. So it's really tough to deal with. It's really delicate, and it's tough to get the bees to draw it out right, and then if they don't cap it all perfectly, it doesn't look very good. You have to have a super strong hive and a great honey flow. So there's just a lot of complicating things about producing comb honey. But what I want to show you today is my favorite method of just producing a few frames worth of comb honey. So if you're not trying to produce several supers full, and you just want to make some to give to your friends and family, or to try in your own house, there's a lot simpler way to make a few frames of comb honey than just trying to do a whole box full of it. So what I do, you want to use shallow frames in general. So this is a shallow frame. It makes a better comb honey. Usually if you go with a medium or a deep frame, it's a lot more fragile, and it'll often fall out of the frame because that weight is so heavy and the foundation is so fragile. So I get shallow frames, and it's okay if they go into a medium box. I'll show you that in just a second. So what I do is I just get a shallow frame. You get the pure beeswax foundation. You don't want any wires in it, and you can't use plastic foundation, because if you use plastic, you're not going to be able to cut up that honeycomb. And then I flip the frame over, and I'm going to insert it in the top groove like this. So I've got it just resting in this top groove. And then you can buy all sorts of fancy implements to try to drip melted beeswax in that groove to secure it in place. You can buy frames that have a wedge on the top bar that you can snap off, insert that comb in, and nail back on. That's a lot of trouble if you're just trying to make a few frames. So I've got this piece of wax that I pulled out of one of my hives. They drew out some wax wrong. So I've just got this little piece of wax, and I'm just gonna take a few pieces of it and crumple it up. And I'm just gonna stick it in little balls on either side of this foundation and just kind of use that wax to glue in this piece of foundation. And so it's super quick, super simple. I'm just using these little bits of wax. I know it's super unorthodox, super unprofessional, but it's super cheap. And if you're just trying to make a few frames of cut comb honey, you know, you don't need to go buy a bunch of fancy gear. Really, all you need is a couple shallow frames. And then you've got to have that pure beeswax foundation. That's critical. And that's really all you have to buy. You can do this with a medium frame. Again, you've got to be really careful with it, because when it's full of honey, it's so easy for it to fall out and get damaged. So usually I prefer shallow frames to medium frames. But if you go this route, you know, you're really only spending a couple of dollars to produce an entire frame of cut comb honey, rather than, you know, buying it at the store for a fortune, because cut comb honey sells for a lot of money. Now, once this has been in the hive, the bees are going to really glue this all together so that it won't be quite so fragile. But you can see now it's hanging down just like I want it to. You can see I've got these little pieces of wax stuck on top to hold it in place. It's hanging down nice and neat. Those little pieces of wax are, again, holding this all together, and it's hanging down just like I want it. And now let's take it out to the bees and put it on a beehive. Okay, so I've got our 2 frames with the pure beeswax foundation ready to go into the hive. Now it's super hot out here today. Well, super hot. It's in the mid-90s, so a nice, you know, moderate day in Texas. But it's hot enough that out in the sunlight, this foundation is going to melt pretty quick. So I need to keep it in the shade. So I'm going to set it down over here in the shade. Now, you do want to install it the same day, install it in a hive the same day you put it in the frames. If any dust gets on the foundation, the bees aren't going to draw it out. Now, I want that foundation kind of in the heart of the hive, surrounded by frames that the bees are already filling with honey. So I've got two medium supers on this hive. They've already got the top one pretty much completely full of honey. Well, they've actually got both boxes pretty much full of honey. I want that foundation in my bottom super because it's closer to the brood nest and the bees are more likely to draw it out quickly. So I'm just going to take my top super off. I'm going to pull one of my frames of honey out. So I've got a frame with a lot of honey on it in the bottom. And I'm going to insert one of these frames, make sure it's nice and straight, right in between the other frames that are already in place. And then I'm going to skip over a couple frames and I'm going to do it again. So remove the frame of honey. I don't want these two frames of comb honey foundation right next to each other. I want them in between frames that are already drawn out and that the bees have already filled. So I'm going to push those tightly together. These two frames of honey, I'll put them in some other hives just to get rid of them, or you can extract them. And then I'm going to come back and in about a week, I would expect them to have pretty much drawn out those frames. And within a couple weeks, they should have them filled up and you should have some beautiful comb honey that you can slice up and do whatever you do with comb honey. You can put it on a charcuterie board, you can put it in a jar of honey and sell it like chunk comb honey, give it away from friends, to friends. The options are pretty much limitless. So pretty cool way to make just a couple frames of cut comb honey. This hive is ready for another honey super. So we're kind of in the middle of the honey flow where I am here in Texas, maybe on the last third or so of it. And I can usually tell the status of a honey flow right when I walk into a bee yard because there's a smell. You can often smell the bees as they're curing that nectar. They're fanning furiously in the entrance. They especially are today because it's really hot. But they're fanning and you can smell that honey being cured. And so when I open this hive, you know, we've got two deep boxes And then we've got one medium honey super on top. And instantly I could tell they probably needed a honey super just because they were pretty much full of bees in the top box. You know, if they're 80% full of bees in the top box, it's probably a good sign that they need another honey super, especially if you're not too close to the end of the honey flow. And when I start looking at this super, it's just absolutely beautiful, guys. It is packed out. Look at that. I mean, this is the stuff that dreams are made out of for a beekeeper. I mean, just a beautiful frame of completely capped honey, and the entire super is like this. Just gorgeous. Now, it also means that they really need a honey super. My target for a hive is when this top box is about 80% full of bees or 80% full of honey. That's when I'm ready to add a honey super. This hive is pretty much completely, well, even the outside frame, look at that. The very outside frame, almost completely full and capped. So they are really, really ready for a new super. Oh, this box has probably got 40 pounds of honey in it. I just want to check in the brood box really quickly and make sure that they are not honey bound, because sometimes if they get a super that's too full of honey, then they will overfill the brood nest. Looks like this hive has not done that. They've got lots of good brood, but they still have a couple empty frames that are available for the queen to lay on. And more importantly, when I go down to the middle frames that are completely full of brood, they're just that. They're mostly full of brood. If these frames were mostly full of honey, then I'd be a little bit concerned. But I've still got lots of brood. I've still got lots of eggs and larvae, plenty of room for that queen to lay. So I'm really not worried about them being honey bound. So they've done a great job, like they usually do, of keeping this center area of the brood nest free for the queen to lay and storing the honey up in the upper boxes where it's supposed to be stored. Now, if I were to leave this hive another few weeks like this, then they would start overcrowding that brood nest with nectar and the queen would have nowhere to lay. So we've caught it in time. And so I'm going to go ahead and add another honey super right up on top. It's already drawn out honeycomb. And so within a few days, I expect to see this super immediately filling full of nectar because they're going to want to empty out that space a little bit. And hopefully they'll fill it full before the end of the honey flow. Today we're going to talk a minute about a weak hive that just won't grow. It's so frustrating, especially if you're new to beekeeping. You know, you installed a package or you installed a nook and they just aren't growing very fast. A lot of times it just takes patience. And there's some years where the weather doesn't help either. If it's really wet, really rainy, or super dry and there's not a lot of forage for the bees, it's just going to slow them down a lot. So sometimes it just takes patience. But sometimes there are things you need to watch out for too. They could be causing the bees to slow down. So this was a package that we installed, over a month ago, and they haven't quite filled up their bottom box. They're growing, but not great. We've had a lot of really cool wet weather, and so we did give them a little bit of a pollen patty to help them. We've been feeding them 1-to-1 sugar water. It's not critical, but if you see many adult small hive beetles, we've got our small hive beetle trap in the hive. I absolutely love these for small scale beekeeping. They're metal, so they're way tougher than those flimsy plastic ones. We sell these at the Bee Supply, and they're fantastic. The best way to go for trapping small hive beetles. But this is a hive that, they're trying to grow. They've got brood. I'm seeing a lot of eggs. I'm seeing good brood, but they just seem a little on the slow side. So the biggest thing to check for is just to make sure that you do have eggs and larvae and brood. So you've got to make sure that they do have a queen. If they don't, obviously you need to requeen. But they've got brood, and they've got pretty good looking brood overall. I mean, you can see, and I'm going to show you a couple things in this one that might be helpful for you. So you can see we've got a really nice frame of cap brood, and the brood pattern is pretty good, pretty solid brood pattern. Now there's a few other frames in here that the brood pattern isn't nearly as good. So you can see on this frame, for example, the brood pattern isn't all that great. But I'm okay with that because I do have some frames with a really good brood pattern. And that tells me that the queen isn't failing because she does have good brood pattern on a few frames. It tells me that on this frame in particular, she was probably laying around pollen or nectar. Something was in her way. So I feel pretty decent about the queen. decent bee population. They've got enough food. You know, they've probably got about 15 to 20 pounds of excess stores of syrup stored in this bottom box, which is about where I want it. So I'm going to keep feeding them maybe a half a gallon of 1-to-1 sugar water a week. But then the other thing I'm going to do, and this is one of my favorite things to do on hives that I'm just not happy with their rate of growth, is I do like to feed them a little bit of Complete. So Complete, and I'll link to this in the video, but this is Complete. It's got 157 or 158 different ingredients. And what the claim is that it dramatically increases your brood survival rate. And so I use this as a small scale beekeeper, and I use it some commercially too. And it does seem to increase the amount of brood production and the amount of brood that actually survives, because there's a decent percentage of eggs and larvae that don't survive, that actually die and the bees clean them out. But this really seems to help the brood survive at much greater rates. And so the best thing to do is treat with this 4 times. It's an all-natural product. And you mix 4 teaspoons of this with a quart of 1-to-1 sugar water. And then you just drizzle 8 ounces on the top bars of each week hive. And so I've just got this little pump-up sprayer. And you know, the goal is, it's called the drench method, where you're basically drenching the hive with this mixture, and there we go. And it doesn't have to be exactly 8 ounces, but about 8 ounces. And the bees immediately eat it, clean it up, and it gets into their system, which is exactly what we're looking for. And then you're gonna do this 4 times, you know, anywhere from 4 to 7 days apart. And usually it really helps the bees start growing much, much quicker. And then you can mix it with syrup too. So if you want to do about half that strength and mix it with the 1-to-1 syrup you're feeding, in addition to the drench, that can be really helpful too. But other than that, if you've got a good healthy queen, she's got a decent brood pattern, they've got enough food, there's not much you can do other than wait on them to grow, hope the weather gets a little better, and then giving them something like Complete or a little bit of pollen patties can be helpful as well to boost them up a bit. If all that fails, then you might need to go ahead and requeen, but I would give it, you know, at least a month to 6 weeks after feeding some pollen patty, feeding that 1-to-1 syrup, feeding some Complete, until making that judgment call. The last thing you can do is test for varroa mites and make sure they don't have a varroa mite issue, because that'll certainly hamper growth as well. Hey friends, Blake Shook here. I wanted to take just a second and respond to some of the news articles a lot of you as beekeepers have probably seen that talk about there's over 1 million new beehives in the US over the past couple of years. Some new USDA surveys came out that shows this ridiculous increase in hives in the country. And that's caused confusion for a lot of people. And it's caused confusion for a lot of consumers too, because they're wondering, is there not a problem with honeybees? Were we lied to all along and there never has been a problem? Or are we past the problem and honeybees are doing fine now? And we've got this massive growth and the crisis of losing bees is over now. And like a lot of things, it's not that simple. I mean, I've been involved in all levels of the beekeeping industry since I was 12 years old, so over 20 years ago. I was a small scale beekeeper, a sideline beekeeper. I run over 30,000 beehives now, and involved in lots of different organizations, and was interviewed by a lot of news agencies since that original article came out showing that there was this ridiculous increase in bees. I wish it were true. I wish that I could say, yes, bees are getting better. Losses are declining and we're over the hump. It's just not true, unfortunately. Some beekeepers have grown. We have seen some minor increases in hives, but the reality is we're still hovering between a 40 and 50% annual loss rate. Really, almost every year, that loss rate ticks up 1 to 2%. That's a big problem. A couple decades ago, we were in the teens. We were losing 15, 16% of beehives every year. Now we're almost 50% every year, and that has not changed. What has changed is some of the ways the surveys were conducted. There's differences in the number of beekeepers they surveyed. There's a lot of extrapolation that has gone on in those numbers that we think as an industry is very inaccurate, the extrapolation. There's the way surveys were conducted. They surveyed farms, and for us commercial beekeepers that move our bees around to multiple farms throughout the year, a lot of those beehives are getting double or even triple counted in the surveys. And then there's some seasonality effects. If you take the survey in the spring when every beekeeper is at their max number, that number looks a lot higher compared to maybe when the survey is normally taken. In the fall, for example, that number is going to show a lot lower. So while there is some sort of positive news and some growth in the industry, it's nothing close to 1 million beehives, and bees are just not out of trouble. So the damage that an article like that can do is that it can make legislators or the general consumer think that, oh, I don't have to worry about bees anymore. Bees are doing just fine. And that's not the case. We need help more than ever. We need beekeepers to stay vigilant, the consumer to care. We need legislators to care because the industry is still in a lot of trouble, still needs the support of consumers and of legislators. And we don't want to take the foot off the gas when it comes to that support. So spread the word. If you talk to consumers, if you talk to your legislators, if you talk to other beekeepers, let them know that those numbers aren't quite accurate and the bees still need your help.
All righty, folks. So that was the bee yard portion. Let's jump back in here to the presentation and talk a little bit more about bees. So some of the basic June tips to keep in mind that were not mentioned in the video, as we look at flowers and flows, it's kind of all over the place right now. I mean, a lot of areas in the far Gulf Coast regions are, wrapping it up as far as the honey flow goes. And then other areas are just getting started. And I've talked to a lot of beekeepers every day, all over the country. And the general consensus that I've heard is it's wet. There's a lot of rain, not in every area, but a lot of areas. This is from the National Phenology Network. This was as of yesterday. This is just showing the bloom index and how early or late most of the country is when it comes to blooms. The red means it's really early. The blue means it's late. No color means it's the same. And so obviously central US to the East Coast is pretty early. The Midwest is pretty much on schedule. Some of the West is a little bit late. And then the Gulf Coast region and Florida is pretty much on schedule too. So just interesting to kind of see the timing of honey flows in general. And I would say, where I live just outside of Dallas, I would agree that the blooms came early and it's wrapping up early. We're still in the thick of the honey flow, but my guess is, in a lot of Texas in the next week, it'll start wrapping it up as far as the honey flow goes. This is a U.S. drought map as of yesterday as well. Looking pretty good. I mean, it's been a minute since I've seen it this light. Obviously, if you're in southern Florida, you've got some issues. Parts of Texas, New Mexico is pretty rough. But when we look at regions that usually have a lot of honeybees, the regions that have a lot of honeybees in the U.S., with the exception of South Florida, looks pretty good. And usually this would be a great thing, but I feel like I make less honey on years where it's too wet. I tend to make a little more honey on drier years. Now, the drier years mean we have a worse summer dearth. Summer's rougher, and fall can be rougher. So this is good news for summer and fall. But for honey production, it could almost be a problem in that there's too much rain. For reference, this was exactly a year ago. So a lot drier overall a year ago than it is today. So my prediction for the honey flow to date is fair to poor for the southern U.S. Is my prediction. The northern U.S. and the Midwest is too early to tell. The honey flow has not started yet. But I'm super curious to get your input. So I'm going to launch a poll here, and it's just asking, what's this flow status for you? So compared to last year, how is your honey crop looking? Worse than last year, the same as last year, better than last year? or you don't know because it's your first year. So of all of you on the webinar, there's a bunch of you. I'm just curious how it is shaping up. Wow, so this is crazy. So as of yet, no one has said better than last year. Not a single person has said better than last year. Now somebody's probably going to jump on and do it, but 41% of you say that it's worse than last year. About 50% of you say it's the same as last year. And the rest of you say, you know, you don't know because this is your first year. So roughly half are saying worse than last year, and about half are saying the same. Not a single person said better than last year. So very interesting. Very interesting to see that as of yet, it's certainly not better than last year, and for anybody, not a single person on the call. So very interesting. So with that, what should your expectations be? So your first and second year expectations, you know, for all of you that said, I don't know, this is my first year, or maybe this isn't your first year, but you made a lot of splits or bought a bunch of bees. You know, my goal for a first year beehive is usually to get them to draw out and fill up my 2 brood boxes. That's kind of my objective. Year 2 is when you can make a surplus honey, and that's just because you have honeycomb at that point. When bees have to draw out a second brood box and draw out a honey super, it just really, really slows things down. On a good year, they might still be able to make a honey crop, but if you're brand new to beekeeping, you know, making a bunch of honey in your first year isn't typically a very realistic expectation. Now, that being said, if you do want to harvest a couple frames of honey, you can pull a few frames of honey out of your brood box. I wouldn't do more than 1 or 2 and just harvest those if you just want a few jars of honey in your first year. You'll need to feed your bees a bit, but you can pull a few frames out. Now, if you've been feeding sugar water, you know, you might have honey mixed with sugar water, but hey, if it's your first year and you really want a few jars of honey, you can pull a few out of your brood box just for fun. You know, for the most part, if you're caring for hives, most years it's not necessary to feed much through May and June. The natural honey flow in most regions sustain that. This year has been the exception in a lot of regions as it's been really wet. A lot of people have been feeding their bees when they expected to be making honey. And instead of making honey, they're out feeding their bees. So it's disappointing. But with drier weather, hopefully on the horizon in a lot of areas, you can hopefully slack off on the feeding. If your hive is not backfilling the brood nest, continue feeding. So if you don't have your honey supers on yet, if you're still just your 2 deep boxes, your 2 brood boxes, I would keep feeding a 1-to-1 syrup until they get those 2 boxes full. You can add your second brood box when your first one's 80% full. And you know, if you have a hive that's less than 1 deep, less than half of 1 deep box full of bees, you can use an introducer on the largest opening. But in general, I don't really bother with introducers at all this time of year. Whether you're adding your second brood box or adding another super, like you saw in the video, when the top box is 80% full, it's time for another box. When should you stop adding supers? My rule of thumb is when I'm within an estimated 7 days of the end of the honey flow, that's when I stop adding honey supers because I really want them to fill out what they have. So now what that date is, that's when you've got to talk to other local beekeepers and figure out, hey, when does the flow usually end? You know, it might be the 4th of July, it might be August. If you're in the Midwest, it might be mid-August. In North Texas and in Texas in general, or across really much of the South, excuse me, that's usually mid-June. You know, usually mid-June is when I stop adding supers. You can add 2 supers at once early on in the flow. So, you know, in May, if I have a really strong hive, sure, I'll put on 2 supers at once. So I don't have to go back as frequently. And then bottom supering, I've got a lot of great videos on our YouTube channel about bottom supering. So go check those out if you're unsure what that is. I want to jump over to Jamie Ellis really quickly because it's a common problem this time of year. You put on your honey supers, maybe you didn't use a queen excluder, and now you have brood in your honey super. So I think Jamie Ellis has a great tip on what to do if you find brood up in your honey supers. So I'll jump over to Jamie and see what he has to say about brood in your honey supers.
A lot of beekeepers do not use queen excluder. So the word queen excluder simply means that wherever you put that thing, a queen can't go through. So if the queen's in the bottom box and there's an excluder, she's excluded from the uppermost boxes. If she's in the uppermost box and there's an excluder, she's excluded from the bottommost boxes. Well, a lot of beekeepers can't stand queen excluders. It's just another piece of equipment that they have to purchase. So they don't use them at all. And in those cases, and I would argue that's probably most commercial beekeepers, for those beekeepers, queens have free reign in their entire hive. So bees aren't just, the queen isn't just confined to the brood chamber. She is technically able to go to the uppermost box. So I've worked with plenty of beekeepers in the past who've had a brood chamber where most of the brood is, and a medium super or another brood chamber where some brood is, and then 2 or 3 honey supers during honey season, and the queen has inadvertently ended up in the uppermost box and laid eggs, and now you've got brood in your honey. So what do you do if a queen lays eggs in your honey super? Number 1, don't sweat at all. You can still extract that honey. That's why you pass it through a filter, right? If for some reason you're extracting those combs and eggs and larvae and pupae get slung out, it will not make it through the filter and you'll be okay. Number 2, a lot of beekeepers, if they see that their frames have brood in them, their honey frames, they will uncap the honey, but if it's capped brood, they won't uncap that. So only the honey slings out. And again, you're going to say, well, eggs and larvae don't occur in capped cells. They will sling out. But again, that's why we have filters. So I don't really worry about having brood in the honey supers at all. But I will tell you what I do to stop it from happening in the first place. I use excluders. Now, it is important that you hear me say this. It's an important caveat. I'm not telling you you should use excluders. I'm not telling you you shouldn't. It's a purely management decision. There are no right or wrong answers related to queen excluders. I'm just telling you what I do. I use excluders so that for a couple of reasons. Number 1, I want my queen to stay where I know she should be, which is in the brood nest. So if I ever have to manage her, right, if I ever have to find her or replace her, I know where I have to look for her. And the added benefit of that is number 2, which is I don't get brood in my supers. But if I do get brood in my honey supers, I don't lose any sleep. It will filter out and it will be okay.
Couldn't agree more. It's always great to get advice from one of the best. So, all right. So when to stop feeding? It's another common question this time of year. You should stop feeding your bees when you add your first honey super, assuming it's all drawn out comb. If your first honey super is pure foundation, then I usually keep feeding for another week or so to help them get started drawing out the foundation and then stop feeding. If your bees are becoming honey bound or backfilling the brood nest with syrup, time to stop feeding. If both of your brood boxes are at least 80% drawn comb and filled 80% with honey, brood, and pollen, you can typically stop feeding as well. This is what backfilling looks like. It usually occurs naturally in the late fall and to a lesser extent in the summer as brood rearing slows down. It can occur in the spring if a hive is being overfed. It's especially common in smaller, weaker hives where they don't have enough labor force to use all the syrup that you're feeding them. The solution is just to stop feeding for a couple of weeks and then check back or slow the rate of feeding. This picture, this picture is kind of what it looks like. You've got a few capped frames, capped cells of brood, and then you've got all this shimmering nectar or syrup mixed in with it. Usually the frames in the center of your brood nest should be mostly brood with nectar or honey around the edges, not all in the middle like you see in this frame. So these pictures are very normal. You've got lots of shimmering nectar on the picture on the right or syrup around the edge, same on the picture on the left, but you've got all this open space for brood, eggs, larvae in the center area. That's what we want to see rather than them filling the entire frame with that nectar. Slow growing bees, I had a little video about that, so I'm just going to run through it really quickly. You know, I talked about queen health could be an issue. The amount of food available, if they're underfed, they're not going to grow. Feeding complete can really help boost up the strength. Adding brood from another hive can really help. So if you've got a strong hive, it's got lots of extra brood, you know, give that weak hive a frame of capped brood from your stronger hive. That's really going to help. If they're honey bound, that can be an issue. Usually it's just weather and patience. You know, if it's a bad spring, a cool, rainy spring, it just takes patience. Bees grow at different rates every single year, depending on the weather. Let's skip over that for sake of time. I want to close before we get to Chari. Chari's talking about bottling and selling honey tonight. So I want to make sure we have plenty of time for that. But the next 10 minutes or so, I want to go over something really interesting with you. I'm going to have a video about this in July that we're going to talk about a unique way to handle varroa mites. But just keep in mind that if you're treating with chemical treatments, the window's closed for most hives if you want to make honey. So June, you know, you've got honey supers on your hives, your bees are producing honey, so you don't want to use mite treatments, but you need to start thinking about how am I going to handle varroa mites when I harvest honey. For myself in our operation, we pull honey and within a week at the most, ideally within a day, we are treating varroa mites because varroa mite levels tend to peak right about the time you harvest honey. So if you harvest all your honey and then let your bees sit a month, they're going to be really damaged in most cases by varroa mites. So you need a plan now so that when you pull the honey supers off your hive, you can immediately treat for varroa mites. Super important. It's the most common cause of hive death. When someone comes to me and says, "Hey, Blake, I lost my hive," I say, "Did you treat for varroa mites?" And they say, "Nope." And I go, "Okay, 90% chance that was the cause." We have a virtual varroa mite management class on our website, and I really recommend you watch that because it really goes over in detail all the different treatment options and how to handle varroa mites. We're planning on having a lot of classes at all of our stores as well about how to handle varroa mites in the next month. And then we'll talk about this a lot in our July monthly buzz because it's a big topic for July. So this will be a big focal point where we talk about managing varroa mites. But this is a method that is not well known, but it's surprisingly effective for handling varroa mites. This is what we call a mechanical method. It uses no pesticides, no treatments. It's completely organic, all natural. It's a mechanical treatment. We're using tools to eliminate varroa mites. It's a little bit of work, but if you do not want to use chemicals in your hives, this really works. It's one of the few mechanical methods or non-chemical methods that I would actually endorse if you follow the instructions very, very carefully. Like I said, I'm going to have a whole video on this. I did this out in the bee yard. It's actually in process now, but I'm filming it as I go along, and I'll show it in July. But you need to start planning before July if you're interested in this method. So let me tell you how to do this. Here's what you need. You need one green drone frame. So that's the picture you see here. That's one of those. It's a normal plastic frame, but the cells are larger. So when the bees draw it out, they're going to draw it out the size of drone cells. So when the queen lays in it, she's laying drones instead of worker bees. So you need one of those. You need one queen isolation cage. We sell these too. They're down here in the lower right. You can put a frame in there and trap your queen in there. It's queen excluders. So worker bees can come and go, but the queen is trapped with that one frame. So you'll need one of those. Whoops. You need one queen clip catcher. So it's what you see up here in the upper left. You're going to need to catch your queen. You need a screen bottom board, and you need powder tripper. So that's what you need. I mean, you can go to TBS and buy all that for like, I don't know, well under 100. I don't know. I should have priced it all out. Under $75, you know, or probably $50. relatively inexpensively. And you can use this stuff year over year. So it's a one-time purchase, but that's what you're going to need. So here's the concept, okay? The goal is to prevent the queen from laying for a few weeks. So you're creating a brood break. Then you're trapping the queen on that drone frame where she's going to be forced to lay drones. All the mites in your now broodless hive, because you're creating a brood break, all the mites that are in your hive are going to be attracted to that frame of brood that the queen is laying on, the frame of drone brood. Varroa mites are really attracted to drones. So after about 10 days, the drone frame could be pulled out of the hive, frozen, and kill all your varroa mites. The queen can be released back into the hive, out of that isolation cage. And then you also, at the same time, dust the hive with powdered sugar to get rid of any residual mites that might still be hanging on adult bees. This method removes about 98% of the varroa mites. And sometimes you only have to do this once in July. Sometimes you have to do it again in September, but a lot of times you just do it once in July. Okay, I probably confused a bunch of you. So here's all the steps. Step one, this is the step you need to do right now if you're interested in this method. You need to purchase one of those green drone frames, place it in your bottom brood box now, because you need those bees to draw that frame out. So, you don't want to put it right in the middle of your brood nest, but put it like right between a frame of brood and a frame of honey. So kind of right in the heart of activity, right up against the brood. So the bees are going to like really want to draw it out because it's right in their way in the brood nest. So go ahead and buy that drone frame, get it in the brood nest in your hive, that bottom brood box. Let the bees draw it out. So you can leave it in there for about 2 weeks to get them to draw it out. You might have to do a little bit of feeding if you don't have a super on to get your bees to draw it out. Once the comb is mostly drawn out, you can remove the frame and store it in the freezer until you're ready to use it. Or if the timing's just right, you can use it immediately. In early July, after you harvest your honey, you're going to locate and catch the queen in that queen clip. You're going to leave her inside that clip, inside the hive, wedged between two frames in the center of the brood nest for 13 days. Okay. So catch the queen in the queen clip, leave her in the clip for 13 days inside the hive. That's going to create a natural brood break. She's not in there laying, so all your brood's going to start hatching out. On day 13, place that drone frame that's drawn out that you had in the freezer or in the hive. Place that drone frame inside the queen isolation cage and put the whole cage in the very center of your brood box and release the queen into that isolation cage. She's immediately just going to start laying drones because that's all. She's trapped in that queen isolation box. She can't get out because it's made of queen excluders. Worker bees will come and go, taking care of everybody. She's going to lay drones for about 10 days. After 10 days, there's going to be no other brood left in your hive. All the varroa mites are going to go to that drone brood that the queen's laying. So after 10 days, release the queen out back into the rest of the hive, remove the drone frame, remove the isolation cage, freeze that drone frame to kill all those varroa mites, and dust the hive with powdered sugar. And you'll get rid of virtually every varroa mite in your entire hive. So it works. It's one of the only mechanical methods I feel like I can really recommend. If you follow these steps carefully, then you can get rid of all your varroa mites without any sort of a chemical treatment. So pretty cool. I'll show you the video next month to walk you through how to do it. Again, if you want to do this method or if you've been sort of interested in it, the big thing to do right now is buy that green drone frame, put it in the brood box so the bees draw it out. It's not going to work if you don't have a drone comb drawn out. That's pretty critical, and you got to get that going right now if you want to use it for later. And yeah, got to follow that timing to a T. So, all right. So with that, I'm right on time. Chari, super excited about bottling and selling honey. I'm going to turn the screen over to you, and then I will help answer questions. So I'll jump over to the Q&A box and answer any questions that that you guys have. Chari, it is all you.
All right, here I am. Can you see me? I got
We can see
everything
you.
done except that part. Okay, can you see it? Let's see.
Yep, we can see it, Chari. That's
Okay,
great.
great. Let me hide my panel. Hide floating controls. There we go. Huh?
Okay.
Okay, James said I had to talk louder. Phew. Hi, y'all. All right, let me start this. Come on, there we go. I really am excited about this because I've got two favorite topics, bee biology and bottling and selling honey, probably because it taps into the marketing part of me. And I really enjoy that. I was told years ago, I won't tell you by who, that I could sell ice cubes to an Eskimo. I don't know if that's true, but anyway, it's it's that time of year that depending on where you are, we've got some folks from Hawaii online tonight, Florida, New York. So we're all going to be at different levels of when we're going to be doing this, but regardless, you need this information. So bottling and selling honey, when you get to it, we're about, I mean, gosh, we're only a couple of weeks from it being time to start extracting. So I love this trifecta of pictures here. We go from, and I don't even know if that's Blake's still facility, if he still has that, or if that's the older version, because he's, you know, a little larger than we are. That'd be the one on the right. That's huge. But one way or another, you're going to have, whatever level you are, you're going to be extracting honey at some point. So I want you to go to, because this isn't an extraction talk. So I want you to go to the current issue, the June issue, and go to page 24, and we have a step-by-step on extracting your honey crop. And it's really good. It lays out what you would do if you were a small scale. And the far right, that's James, that's a couple of kitchens ago. And we were just doing a small batch, but you know, it doesn't matter if you're doing a couple of supers or 50 or 100, which we've done. It's still the same process. You still got to take care of where you are, how you're keeping it clean, and so forth. So let's talk about that. Regardless of the size of your operation, there are certain rules and regulations that apply. And I think that James will agree with me. We're very much sticklers on following what's right. If somebody says that we're supposed to follow a rule, whether it be in life or in honey extraction or bottling, we're going to do our best to follow it to the letter of the law. If we don't, then we're going to feel guilty about we didn't do something right, and we're going to feel a little apprehensive about selling that to a customer. So we do, and there's 5 areas of jurisdiction. And I was having conversation with a very good dear friend of mine, Lynn Jones, that writes articles for the magazine about this today. And I decided I was going to pull back on any details because it's so different everywhere you go, that what I'm going to do is overview these 5 areas of jurisdiction. So food manufacturer's license, check with your state. If you're in Texas, Lynn did a very good job, and I'm gonna hold this up and pretend like you can read these bitty words. And she has this PDF of what Texas offers. I started looking into other states, and I'm gonna tell you, there are no two alike. So if you want to see what Texas offers, and you are a Facebook user, go, if you're not already, it's listed on Texas Friendly Beekeepers and also on Central Texas Beekeepers, or email me and I will get a copy of it. And you can email me at editor@thebeesupply.com, and it tells you the different things that where we fall under, because honey kind of entered into cottage food this year in Texas, and there was a lot of, it's very gray to me, very gray. But where we start getting really legal is the FDA food facility registration, if selling wholesale and engaging in interstate commerce. Boy, doesn't that sound like Chari words? Not. FDA.gov under registration and food facilities, go in there and read it. It is, I even reread it again today. It's a lot, but decipher whether you fall under that category, okay? Because I'm not here to tell you whether you need to do this or not. You'll need to look. It has a lot to do with how big you are or how big you grow into, okay? Now, where we all fall, whether you're this big or you're this big, is the FDA food labeling, FDA.gov, under food labeling and nutrition. It applies to everybody. And we have to abide by those labeling laws. And that basically, just to hit the high spots, it's just, you got to have honey as the largest word. You got to have your address where the honey is bottled, and the weight of your honey in two different measurements, in ounces and in grams. But there's a little more to that. So go to it. It lays it out pretty well. And then local health department guidelines, if applicable. We really don't in our area have to abide by that, but you never know, you might have to. And homeowners associations and deed restrictions, you'd be surprised. There's some areas, some subdivisions and small municipalities that don't want you doing anything that's called generating food for sale. So you really want to look and make sure that you won't fall into that category. If you do, go the proper route, find out what you need to fill out and do what they ask you to do and be legal about it. And that's my recommendation. It's what we would do if we had to. So, and probably the most important to me is the good manufacturing practices, GMPs. I put this long TAC code up there, but basically what it means is that you've got to have a super clean environment where you are not only extracting but bottling your honey. You've got to avoid cross-contamination. You've got to have clean utensils and clean bottling conditions. That is my what?
James said clean hands.
And James said clean hands. He's heard me say that a time or two. We wear gloves, but you know, you don't have to. I wrote down how many pages are in that. I think there's 58 pages in that GMP. So I did kind of put it all in like 4 bullet points, but it's not hard reading. Read through it because it's what you would want if you're consuming a product. It's what you want someone to do when you're purchasing something, right? I want all this to be followed to the letter when I'm consuming it or purchasing it for my family to consume. This is the fun part. The perfect label, and I will tell you, after the last 13 years or so, we've seen a label or two come across, and some of them are incredibly gorgeous. Some of them make you scratch your head and go, well, okay, good try. Good try. And, you know, I think over the dozen years we've been actually selling honey, I think we're on our second or third try. And I think it gets better each time. So don't, you know, if you're not just loving your first one, it's okay to perfect it. But first develop a good logo that's unique to you or your farm. I really think that that's important. And you're going to see it anyway, so I'll tell you in advance. Our honey's called Blue Ribbon Honey Company because we won a blue ribbon. We won in first place one year, and by gosh, by golly, it meant blue ribbon, right? So we absolutely built a logo around that. Find something that is good, that's you, and build your logo around that. If you have any questions on how to do that, if you've got Canva, canva.com, or someone who has that, or any AI, artificial intelligence, I know some people are dead set against that, but I went in and played around with that a little bit today. I just typed in honey jar logo with bees and trees. You wouldn't believe some of the cool stuff, and it's unique to you. Unless someone else puts those exact words in there, that's yours. You can put it on your jar and it's gorgeous. So really develop something unique to you. Maybe promote unique forage flavors. If you are a monocrop, like we are in Southeast Texas, we might be tallow, only tallow, or wildflower, something like that is very nice to put on the label. Use terms that garner attention. And I wrote some notes down for that. And I want to read it. Use terms that garner attention like local, raw, fresh, hometown, farm fresh, things that reach out and make you different than other folks. And yes, some of you will end up on a store shelf. So really think this through. And if you buy a bunch of labels, you want them to be good from now on. Catchphrase. Ours is our bees making your honey. I don't know where you may have thought of that. I don't remember which one of us thought of that, but it's stuck with us. It's a catchphrase. It could be Granny's yummy honey. It could be, whatever. James's bees, whatever you want, just a catchphrase is nice to have attached to your honey. And your phone number. I will tell you, number one thing that I was like a moment, we had, I guess, our first homemade labels that we were printing ourselves. And somebody drove up one day and they said, well, I got your honey from you at that farmer's market, but I couldn't find you. You didn't put your phone number on it. It's like, duh, put your phone number on the honey jar, on the label. It really matters. You want people to find you again. You really do. Choosing your bottling container. Think about your market. So depending on where you are, if you're going to be more rural or more suburban or even big city, of what that means to you. So I've got several options here. The first one on the left is a Muth jar, super niche market. That's going to be, if I've got a nice little boutique store that I'm going to be able to sell it in, that would be gorgeous. The one next to it with the yellow lid, that's a squeeze 1 pound, or it comes in various sizes, but squeeze jar. That's a wonderful across the board. People love squeeze jars, but then there's also the market that doesn't want plastic. So that's kind of what we ran into, was that our market didn't want plastic. So we tend to be the mason jar, glass mason jar. I love the glass skept. I believe TBS that we do sell these. They're gorgeous, gorgeous jars. But the number one thing you want to think about before you choose your container is get your label worked out, because your label needs to fit. We use different size mason jars, and we have one label that we have that fits all of them. And then we just have a blank where we can write in the weight of it. And we just write them in on each one. And it works very well for us. Bears are the toughest. There's very little room for a label, but a lot of folks like the honey bears, a lot of them. And then that's some more squeeze bottles down there at the bottom. But think about your label when you're going to be choosing your jars. How to calculate quantity for labeling. I've had more than one discussion with this on this topic before, because when you buy a pint mason jar, what does it say? Anybody know?
16 ounces.
16 ounces. Well, it's not 16 ounces of honey. It is 24 ounces of honey. So you really need to do the calculation, weigh the container, and then weigh the honey weigh the container once the honey is in there. And that's your measurement. And we are supposed to put both ounces and grams on our labels, y'all. I know there's somebody out there going, but I don't worry about that. Well, you don't have to. There's not any bee police or honey police. Actually, there is a bee police in Bee, Texas. Isn't that where we started? Somewhere, maybe a honey town and somewhere that has a police for you. Anyway, you need to put both if you want to be the letter of the law. Warning statement of not to feed to infants under 1 year of age is advisable, but it is not required. I don't know about every state. I can only speak for our home state, which is Texas, but it is not required here. We do put it on our jars. I think that it's a good, I think it's good to have on there. It just kind of covers your basis if there's someone that's not educated on that. And if you're not educated on it, just Google why infants can't have honey. I'm not going to go down that road right now. Nutrition label, only if you're selling over $50,000 in food sales. Refer to that FDA food labeling guide, and that is not us. So, and if you're going to do that, that's great. I'm sure I'm sure Desert Creek Honey, which I've got a shadow of in there, I'm quite certain they do well with that, but they have a label on theirs. Choices of ways to bottle. And that first bullet point, you're going to think, really, do you do that? Guess what? We did it that way for a long time. We would bottle it into buckets, and then I had this certain pitcher that I would dip down in there. James would line up the jars and we would pour it. It was a mess, but it worked. We lost a lot of honey, but it works. And we didn't have a honey bucket with a gate on it. That was the next step. That was step 2 for us. Honey bucket with a filler gate. Warming tank with a filler gate, which is what we have now. Large scale automatic honey bottling equipment, I would love to have, but you know, my house, that would be our house. We would have it from one end of our house to the other. But that's some various, there's a ton of different bottling systems, but this gives you an idea of ways that people tend to do it. Steps to filling a pretty jar of honey, and I probably shouldn't have said that. There's a lot of guys out there, but you want your jar to be pretty and presentable, right? You want it handsome. James said handsome jar of honey. Okay. You want to put your label on prior to filling. Once you you fill your honey bottle up, you don't want to create bubbles, and laying it over to put your labels on is going to create a bubble. I promise it will. So label all your jars and then fill it up. Fill it to the collar. If you don't know what the collar is, that's that first rim where you put the lid on. Okay. So that first rim, at least there. You don't want to see airspace between your lid and the top of your honey. It's not aesthetically pleasing. Remember, we purchase with our eyes and we want that to look good. Avoid filling warm honey, and I'm going to tell you why. That's the last bullet point. It bubbles, because warm honey has a tendency to bubble. It floats, it'll foam, all those things. Foam is miniature bubbles. It'll bubble big bubbles one way or another. Too warm, slightly warm, okay. Too warm, it will create problems. If bubbles are forming while you're filling it, which ours can at some points do that, just tilt it. And I'm going to say this, and don't anybody write me letters, but you know, when you see on TV, because I'm not a beer drinker, see when they pour a beer and they hold it sideways so it doesn't foam up, same theory. Tilt your bottle as you're filling it and let it hit the side of the jar instead of right down in the center where bubbles could form. So anyway, that's all I know about the filling a beer thing. All right, helpful tips. Do not store in plastic honey buckets with gates, like the one I showed you a minute ago. You want me to go back? That one right there. It's a wonderful gate. This is a premium gate. Wonderful for filling jars, wonderful. But do not store it in that, because you have a rounded surface, the bucket, and a flat gate that's been attached to it. Well, it's going to be this way, right? It'll eventually leak, no matter how good the gate is. Ask us how we know, because we've tried it. It doesn't work. Just don't do it that way. I will suggest getting a lid, purchasing the 5-gallon bucket lid and putting that nice premium honey gate in the lid, in a 5-gallon bucket lid that you can change from bucket to bucket to bucket, and very tightly get your rubber hammer it down on good, then tilt it over then you can set it on your countertop, use the gate, and then tilt it back up, and it's not going to leak, right? Store honey above 85 degrees. We like to, and this is the God's honest truth. We tell our customers this, and it's the truth. Our honey tank keeps our honey at hive temperature, or just under, about 90 degrees. And we go through it rather quickly, so it doesn't darken or scorch it or anything. But if you'll keep it just slightly warm, you're not going to run into a problem with it crystallizing. And boy, Heidi, only bottle what you can sell, and sell it soon. I don't remember what year it was. I want to say it was probably 2014, maybe no, 15 or 16. I don't know if we just got the fire sale on plastic 1-pound jars, but we went to town and filled about, I don't know, maybe 100 of them. and put them to the side because we just knew we'd sell them quick. Maybe 3 months later, we didn't sell them all, and we had about 100 boat anchors. They were frozen solid, not frozen cold, but solid crystallized in plastic, 1 pound containers. And that was, I mean, you might as well just throw it away, right? Actually, no, but it's a pain. If you've got an old freezer or an ice chest, put a light bulb in there. It has to be an incandescent or a non-LED bulb. Put it in there. We've got a big giant white, one of those big white ice chests you get at Academy. Put the honey jars in there that are, we call it frozen, but you know, crystallized up, even in plastic jars, a 40-watt bulb overnight, and it will melt it back down. It doesn't get too hot. It works beautifully, but only bottle what you can sell quickly. There's no point in having to go through that. How am I doing on time? Doing okay. Marketing small scale producer sales, which is right up my alley. Price your honey to what your market will bear. Depending on where you are, ask around, look around at the farmers markets, look around and see where those honey prices are falling, and be in that market, okay? Because if you're too high or too low, first of all, if you're too low, you're going to sell out really quick, and you're not going to make you're leaving money on the table, and if they say, don't do that. You want to be about even with everyone else, or even a little bit more to be a niche market, right? Because you're the beekeeper, you're local, you want to promote that in your honey sales. Include the cost of doing business. So yes, everybody's asking, let's say $20 for a quart. Make sure that you're making some money with that you've included your cost of the bees, you're raising the bees. Try to do a ballpark if you don't keep good records. The label, everything in this picture costs money, every bit of it. The bottle was a lot, you know, I think a little over $1. The label for us was about 7 or 8 cents. The don't feed to infants or crystallization label, another 2 or 3 cents. So you see all of this adds in. That's part of your honey cost. So add it in. Don't just give it away. Containers really went south when COVID hit. We had a big issue with finding containers. The price skyrocketed, and that's what you're going to find now. We've had to go a completely different route. Always keep honey with you. That's not my car, but it can be your car. Always have it with you, and everywhere you go, bring up the topic. If you're at the grocery store, bring up the topic. You're in the line, bring up the topic. If you, James said in the heat of the summer, it won't crystallize. He's right. It won't. It'll stay nice and toasty. Always have it with you. Be ready for a sale. Be ready for a sale. You can't imagine how much we've sold like that. Facebook, Marketplace, Instagram, any social media is great to do. And before I get too far off of it, because I didn't put it on here, a website, they're so easy to make. And I know that sounds probably outreaching, but a website platform like Wix, I promise you, is so easy to make. You just go in and step by step, you can make yourself a quick, easy, very inexpensive website and do well with that. But social media works great. Church, social club friends, you know, your card playing friends. I don't know what any of these clubs are, like the garden clubs and so forth. Church friends, and yes, it's okay to we don't exchange the money in church, but we'll do it in the parking lot. There's something about exchanging the money in church. I just can't do that, but I'll definitely, we had our parking lot guy text me the other day. He said, you know, hey, I'm so-and-so from church in the parking lot. Can you bring me some honey? You betcha I can. You bet. Family, they're your biggest fans. Your least amount of profit, I promise, but that's okay. We love our family. We give it to our family, but if you can get your family started on it, you can also use them for sales. So don't forget that. Don't forget that. Honey locator on honey.com. It took us a minute to locate this in the very beginning, but we're now listed on this. This is for anyone who is legally a honey producer. And I don't remember, I tried to go in and find the form to fill it out, but I couldn't because I'm already have an account with them. But go to honey.com and it pinpoints you. You see all of these numbers on here. That's how many beekeepers are listed in your area. I'm down here by the Houston where the 14 is. So you see there's a lot on that locator. You want people to be able to find you. You definitely, and also with honey.com, you can get free brochures. Now the brochures are free. We give them to our new customers. They have recipe books and how is honey made, and stickers and so forth, but the shipping isn't free. It's up to, I believe, $14.95, and you get a shipment a year, but for $15 to have it's quite a few. I think you can get 100 of some, 50 of others. Anyway, it's a good investment to entice new customers into coming back to you. Great Google listing, because Google, you don't have to really be a, big shot to get a Google listing. You do have to have a business name, but pull that up and look in to see what that is. I know I'm running out of time. I got 4 minutes. Farmers markets and roadside. Farmers markets are a great place. There's a lot of competition there. I suggest you only go to farmers markets where you're the exclusive honey beekeeper, because if you end up with a bunch of you there, none of you are going to do well. Then you're ending up in a money war with fighting prices, and that's pointless. We never go to a place where we know, because we know a lot of the beekeepers around, that we know they're going to be, because that's not fair to them. It's not fair to us. But if you can get in on farmers markets and be the only honey producer there, go for it.
Find your niche.
Find your niche. All right, I'm gonna go through this part really quick, and it's the last part of it. Large scale, and I hope that somebody out there gets there. Blake is obviously there with Desert Creek Honey. Grocery stores, you will fight for shelf space. I'm sure Blake would concur with that. But if you can get in, I say go for it. If you've got the honey production, then go for it. It's a wonderful way to get your product out there and sell a lot of it. Online sales, Amazon, Etsy, just to name a couple. There's a lot of platforms that you can sell a lot of honey on. Your own retail location, you may have your own little store, a little boutique or a health food store, whatever. Sell your own honey. Why not? And then other commercial users, that would be food manufacturers such as cereal companies. Folks that generate a lot of honey have to get rid of a lot of honey. And of course, that's what they're in business for. So they sell to Honey Bunches of O's and those kind of companies that use a lot of honey in their products. So that's just another way that they do it. It is 7:57. Did I do that or what? I think I did. I think I'm on time.
That was amazing, Chari. What a feat. Before we end, so several of you mentioned that the poll wasn't working. So the poll I did earlier, that that you guys weren't able to see the one of the options, which was better than last year. Nobody selected that, and apparently it's because you couldn't see it, which makes a lot of sense. So I just relaunched the poll. Hopefully you can see it. So the question is, compared to last year, how was your honey crop? Worse than last year, the same as last year, better than last year, or you don't know because it's your first year. And I was like shocked, because I was like, not a single person said better than last year. That's crazy. And turns out you couldn't see that option. So now it makes sense. Okay, so all right, so this is a little more balanced the second time. So it looks like about 30% of you say it's worse than last year. About 25% of you say it's the same as last year. About 15% of you say it's better than last year. And then the rest are, you don't know because it's your first year. So still the vast majority in the worse than last year or the same as last year. But about 15% of you did say it was better than last year, which is better than 0, which is what we were seeing earlier. So there you go. All right. With that, folks, I'm going to remind you that next month, we're meeting July 11th, not the 4th. So it'll be 1 week later. And then in the next couple days, you'll get a follow-up email with our recording, links to the product and videos, and then of course a link to the amazing magazine. So thank you for giving us your evening. Thanks for your time. And I can't wait to see you in July. July is such a critical management month, as a lot of you are harvesting honey and we're headed into the summer. So very important month. Don't miss out. We cannot wait to see you there.